Okay, so hello, Sir Robert, and thank you for being here today with us.
Hello,
Talk
nice
to
to see
me
you.
about, yeah, thank you. To talk to me about the idea of Healthwatch, how it came about, and how at Staffordshire, its aims, its purpose, and its effectiveness as a health watch. Also talk to you about how Healthwatch can support the future priorities of health and social care. So I'd like to start firstly by asking, can you please summarise the issues you found at mid-staffs and what led to you recommending a body such as Healthwatch?
Well, thank you, Baz. First, it's really nice to talk to you and to have an opportunity of reconnecting with Stafford, which is full of really nice people, and the hospital is full of really well-intentioned people doing their best to provide great care. Unfortunately, things got in the way of them being able to do that, and I think the issues that we discovered there were, I'm afraid, quite similar to issues I could probably have found in a lot of other places in the country. But what was particular about Midstaffs was that a lot of things were going wrong there, but no one seemed to know they were going wrong. And until frankly, far too many people were suffering things they should never have had to suffer. And obviously, one thought long and hard about why that was so. At the end of the day, I concluded that it was largely because people were not listened to. By people, I mean patients, their families, and staff, actually, all of whom raised issues at one time or another in their different ways. And no one listened. Or if they did listen a bit, what was said was discounted as not being representative, maybe being an exaggeration, and no one got to the bottom of things. So incidents weren't investigated. Statistics that might have indicated things were going wrong were discounted on the basis of technical grounds. And good news, and there was good news. I mean, there's a lot went right in Midstaff, so people seem to forget that. Was fine, and it's obviously right that was celebrated. But the fact that, for instance, one department might be doing very well was sort of taken as a reason for perhaps not believing it could be going badly somewhere else. So that was the sort of cultural background. I mean, unfortunately, there was a more negative side to that too, that people who did raise concerns were not treated very well in various different ways. Patients were, or their families were, who wanted to raise concerns were in some cases excluded physically from the hospital. Staff who raised concerns were bullied and so on. So what was the wider picture about why that happened? Well, unfortunately, it's a sort of picture we could easily see today. There was huge pressure on the hospital leadership to achieve what a foundation trust status, and that was sort of became a be all and end all in itself. And obviously, the reason foundation trust status was created was actually to benefit patients, but that seemed to be forgotten. So everything was done to get the ducks in a row to get foundation trust status without actually concentrating on what was really important, which was what difference it was making for patients. And unfortunately, things that would make a difference, a positive difference, were forgotten. So, for instance, costs had to be controlled, as they always do, but that became an object to be looked at and followed through, really, even if it was at the cost of safety for patients. That wasn't the intention, but that's what happened. So there were pressures on people right through the system from top to bottom, which sort of made some of these things happen, albeit with good intent. And it all came about, in my view, because people would not always ask themselves the question every day, what difference is what I'm doing making for patients? Is it good or is it bad? And places which do that, even in the most difficult and challenging of times, tend to have a better performance than those that don't. So in a nutshell, I think that's what we found at the time.
Thank you for that. So what is it that the health and social care services should be doing to avoid this happening again?
Well, the easy answer is the opposite of everything I've just said, I suppose.
Yeah.
But actually, seriously, I mean, firstly, people who are leaders, and by leaders I mean not just chief executives or secretaries of state for health, but I also mean ward managers, head departments of head clinical directors, and so on. They need to encourage people who work to them to speak up and to listen to what they have to say, because people at the front line know what the truth is. They always have and they always will, but they're often, even today, almost everywhere, frankly, afraid to speak up because people aren't encouraged to do something which is instinctively a bit difficult, so people stop doing it. And those who do it can be bullied and discriminated against. And that actually seems to me one of the most serious things that needs tackling in any organisational culture, which is preventing people sharing their concerns. And I think that needs a number of things. It needs training, actually. I think not only in speaking up, but in listening. None of us are very good at listening to stuff that suggests that perhaps we could do things in a different way. I'm sure most people, if they're honest, would say that's difficult even in family life, let alone in work life. But it's an essential part of safety and in a health service as much as it is in flying an aircraft. So we need to be thoughtful towards each other. We need to understand that, things from other people's points of view, and then discuss things and then come to a conclusion. So we really have to eliminate bullying, discrimination, all the things that prevent people speaking up and doing their jobs properly. And actually, those sort of behaviours, the negative behaviours, are actually more serious, in my view, than people who make a mistake that leads inadvertently to harm to a patient, because that's usually a mistake that's come about because of pressures and so on, which need to be understood. And we need to learn about things like that rather than just blame people for them. So that's a sort of cultural issue. But in terms of sort of priorities, we need to prioritise safety and the quality of service. I'm afraid it's all too easy for boards of places, indeed management generally, to think about money, because there are nice, neat figures that go with that. They're either in credit or in debit. We all know that. Whereas quality and safety are rather more difficult things to measure. But actually, they're really important. And if you get those right, often the money will get itself more right in the first place. And the final thing I would say is that, we talk about little else really, don't we, these days, about the staff of both the NHS and social care. We all know that they need to be well looked after, and in a way which they're not being looked after at the moment in far too many places. And if we don't look after them, both in terms of pay perhaps, but actually just as importantly, the conditions under which they work, they'll leave. And we haven't got enough staff as it is, so we will have fewer staff. But we also need, and it's not just a national issue, it's a local issue as well, we do need a proper strategy as to how we're going to recruit staff and get enough people to do jobs. And that needs creative thinking. I mean, there are many different ways in which we can provide a service, and some of them aren't the way we used to do it. So we need to think of new ways of doing things that use staff more efficiently. We need flexible thinking about who does what. And I think a lot of that happened during the pandemic, and some of that attitude we need to bottle, in fact, and use more generally, because if we don't do that, things are going to get worse rather than better. All the pressures that existed at the time of the matters I inquired into will recur.
How would you describe the structure and impact of Healthwatch across the UK? And is this what you envisaged?
Well, Healthwatch was a mere infant when I was doing my report, and it literally just started. And it was a successor to a number of different attempts to involve people in the decision-making processes of the National Health Service and indeed social care. And none of them, community health councils, way back before probably you were born, were said to have worked, but nothing much since then had. Frankly, the structure of Healthwatch as created by the 2012 legislation was something of a Heath Robinson affair. And being a cynic has all the appearance of an afterthought. Got to squeeze it in somewhere, so let's do this. So as you know, Healthwatch is divided into two bits. There's the local Healthwatch, which is funded through local government, and there's the National Healthwatch, which I chair, Healthwatch England, which is funded directly from the Department of Health. And so we have a sort of disconnect between the way in which Healthwatch is funded nationally and locally, and organisationally a bit at that as well. So I think there have been some obstacles in the way of a lot of coherent planning, and it's not surprising to me that when I took over as Chair of Healthwatch England, I found that the profile was quite low, and lots of people, including my own family, frankly, didn't really know what Healthwatch was or what we did. But I think over the years, Healthwatch locally and nationally has demonstrated what an impact you can have from actually talking to the people who use services or need them, and we're finding out what their experiences were, what their needs are, and then actually designing services to fit that need rather than continually trying to fit people into what's already there, if I can put it that way. So we have at the moment, as an example, a terrible crisis at A&E because too many people go to it. Well, that is true. Why does that happen? Because barriers are put in the way, not intentional barriers, about people getting to see their general practitioner. It's not easy to find urgent treatment centres or other means of getting the care you need. And we know that because, but instead of we still try, I think, to force people into things that aren't working, as opposed to try to change the things so they work for people. So, but I think Healthwatch has demonstrated through both locally, I'm sure in your area, but I know in your area, where things could be improved through what people say, and certainly nationally we've done the same. And the reason it works and has an impact is that it's all very well collecting figures about things, which are important, and statistics, but actually what motivates people to make changes is listening to the stories people tell about what it was really like to wait 16 hours in the back of an ambulance, or what it was really like not to be able to find a dentist, and in some cases having to extract one's own teeth. Things like that really make a difference to ministers, decision makers, both locally and nationally, and change comes about. But it's more, I think, than that, because I always look at how the health service is run on the basis of being a patient. If I go and see a doctor, I'm expected to take a full part in the discussion that leads to treatment. I'm continually asked how I am, how it's going, and whether the outcome is what I'm looking for. But somehow or another, when we start dealing with people collectively, we don't do that. We just tell them this is what's going to happen, and it doesn't work very well. So we need to inject into the way we treat people collectively how we expect to treat them individually. And I think Healthwatch does that, and I think it's recognised now by those who run our system, the value of doing that. Why Healthwatch rather than a voluntary organisation? Well, I think the Healthwatch has an advantage in being a statutory body, there is an obligation that people pay attention to what it says. It is independent, and it's not dedicated to any particular disease or condition or interest, important as voluntary sector organisations are who promote the needs of particular groups of patients. I think Healthwatch is particularly good at reaching out to groups that we don't often hear from, who frankly are often ignored, and who often are actually the people with the greatest health needs and who take up a great deal of the health services time, not necessarily very productively in the sense that we don't get out good outcomes for them. So I think Healthwatch shows great skill in doing that. The work that various Healthwatch have done with travelling communities, with asylum seekers, with particular ethnic minorities who have language difficulties, all of that is work which Healthwatch can do very well and very effectively, and dare I say, amazingly cheaply. So I think that if you like to compare that with how much it costs to get a management consultancy and to do some of the similar work, well, Healthwatch will win every time. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, that's okay. It's answered a couple of other questions. So how, if any, advice or guidance would you give to local ICSs about how to engage with their patient groups effectively and in a meaningful way where outcomes and impacts can be evidenced?
But I think integrated care systems are a fantastically promising innovation. And at least in theory, obviously the practice can be challenging. But the idea of bringing all health and social care providers together to work jointly on a strategy for their community seems to me to be a really good way forward. But for the reasons that we've just discussed, I don't think that's going to work unless these systems engage with and involve, engagement and involvement are two different things, with their local people in the creation of the strategy and also in its implementation. And I see Healthwatch as being a vital component to that work. But I personally think ideally Healthwatch should be a participant both at the Integrated Care Board, which is the sort of NHS part of this structure, if that's what is happening locally, but also obviously the Integrated Care Partnership, which is what brings together social care and the wider bodies in there. And the reason I think Healthwatch should be playing that sort of role is that I think that they can be a convener for all the voices of local people in the ICS footprint. When I say, and obviously there may well be, every area is different, but there can be more than one Healthwatch, but there needs to be a collaboration between Healthwatch to produce, as it were, the product, if you like, at the board level. But I think that because of their statutory position and their independence, they can act not to, as it were, to produce one voice, because one of the things that mustn't happen is that everything is reduced to a common denominator, because there are many different voices, all of which had validity, some very small groups of people, some large groups of people. And I think the Healthwatch can have a really valuable role in making sure all those voices get heard, as opposed to just one or two of them. And I'm not sure any other group could actually do that. And now to do that is obviously challenging for any Healthwatch, and it is actually challenging for the ICS as well, because they have to be willing to listen to awkward stuff. It won't necessarily be in line with their preconceived idea of how things should be done. But if they do listen and they do involve people, two things will happen. One is what they design will be more what people want. But secondly, where that's perhaps not possible, there is a channel through which the reasons for doing it a particular way can be explained. So there is a dialogue that happens, which means there's a common understanding of what the ICS is trying to achieve and what is possible and what isn't. So that's how I would like to see it happen. Of course, none of this, an ICS won't work, and neither will the local Healthwatch work unless both are adequately resourced. And I'm fully aware that how difficult it is for Healthwatch to do its current job on the decreasing resources many have. And I do think, therefore, that, and I think many ICSs are recognising this, that to have an effective relationship, actually ICSs have got to find a resource to share with their Healthwatch to ensure that the sorts of thing that I'm talking about can happen. But I don't think, I mean, ICSs are going to suffer from the same problem Healthwatch actually has in terms of people understanding what on earth they are. I mean, the public have no idea, I don't think at the moment, what an integrated care system is. They probably have a bit more an understanding of what Healthwatch is. So, it's if at the moment ICSs, I think, tend to have a tendency to be talking internally, as lots of providers talk to each other about integrated care system work in language that no one outside that can understand. And I think sooner rather than later that they've got to become really outward facing with explanations to people that people can understand to enable them to take part in, after all, what is the most important service, what are the most important services for their own health and well-being. Does any of that make sense?
No, it absolutely makes sense. I mean, I was going to ask you next about how to describe an effective health watch, but I think you've kind of covered that. Would you like to add anything to that?
Well, yes, I would actually. I mean, I think Healthwatch needs to be aspire to be the go-to place for the local public to go to for information and to share their concerns. And those, I think, we don't probably talk enough about Healthwatch's valuable role in being a channel of communication to the public about where they can go for services, what to do about a complaint, and so on. And so I think that's a really important role that they have. I mean, secondly, they need to have, any local health watch must have good constructive relationships with all parts of the local system of health and social care. And one thing I think I haven't mentioned so far, one of the USPs, if you like, of Healthwatch is that it's one of the very few organisations facing towards people, getting their views, that covers both health and social care. And as we all know, so many of the problems that need fixing in the NHS depend upon solutions around social care. And I'm not just talking about care homes, which is the other problem, but about the social care needs of the community more generally. But we need really good relationships, which isn't just about sitting on committees. It's about having trust that even that when, say, Healthwatch is going to say something that's difficult to hear for a system, it's accepted it's going to be in good faith, it's worth listening to, and it will be based on evidence. So Healthwatch, when it says something, needs to do it not on the basis of a hunch, but on the basis of what they've been told, and for something for which they have evidence. So, and the other thing is good communication skills. Just a bit about language. Healthwatch is really good in my experience at actually translating NHS bureaucratic speak into something that people can understand. And I think it needs good communication skills both outwards to the public, but also inwards and upwards to parts of the system. And that's not, they are potentially two different skills. So those are other things I would add. And of course, one of the great things about Healthwatch is that the way in which basically that it's run by volunteers. Great people like you who are paid to do things, but actually it's the relationship between the professional staff and local volunteers who make up Healthwatch that makes the thing work properly. And I always think that, if I could just make one other point without wishing to sound too preachy, that there is a temptation, I think, people to concentrate on, well, I'll call governance issues. They're important, but we can spend a lot of time talking about governance and standing orders and who does what, and rather less on what the actual job is. And I think that we should always remember, and this is true of Healthwatch England as much as anywhere else, what we're here for, and the need to sort of get on with the job as well as work out the governance around it.
Thank you for that one. So, how do you see the future of Healthwatch and its future priorities and concerns linked to health and social care services?
Yeah, well, won't need me to tell anyone that we live in hugely challenging times for health and social care, and at times when resources are clearly inadequate to deal with need. And in such times, it is very tempting for things like well-being of staff, but actually also involvement of the public to be thought of as soft options, but actually they're more vital than ever. So I think the first priority of Healthwatch in a time like this is to continually remind the people we work with and the people we work for of why we're here. So that's point one. Point two is it's never been more important than it is now for there to be an assertive voice for the public, asserting truth to power. And Healthwatch's job is to tell the system, or one of its jobs is to tell the system what it's actually like being a patient or a service user in these conditions, and what, if possible, what needs to be done to change that. I think that the priority at the moment, apart from that, has to be a focus on inequalities, health inequalities, and maybe the social determinants of health, by which I mean no one is better positioned, I think, than Healthwatch to explain and to report the experiences of groups who suffer most at times of like these, from the barriers to getting services, what those barriers are and how we need to overcome them. Because if we don't do that, actually, we probably won't solve the wider problems of how to deliver a proper health service and proper social care to people, because there are relatively smaller groups, they are called minorities for a reason, whose needs are much greater and therefore need to be dealt with much more effectively. And if we can do that, I think we'll actually end up providing a better service for everybody. So what I would suggest humbly is that there's a need for Healthwatch locally and nationally to focus on, we can't do everything all the time because that just dilutes the strength of the message, is to focus on things which will make a big difference. And that what those are will be different in every area. But I'm thinking actually there would be some areas where you could make a big change for small groups of people. There'll be other areas where perhaps it is better to look for things which are smaller changes for larger groups. I always think that one of the things Healthwatch is really good at doing is pointing out things that aren't working very well in areas where people just don't think about very much or take for granted. I think our work recently on patient transport is one of those. You know, the system doesn't work properly unless you've got effective patient transport, and so many parts of the country that turned out not to be working. We thought dentistry was something we took for granted, and it turns out we have a completely broken dentistry system, and I think that's largely been exposed actually by work from Healthwatch. So there are things like that. We can't do everything, but if we focus on things which make a big difference, if they're put right, but maybe the solutions are simpler than people thought, then that's probably what we ought to do. But part of that has to be a better focus than any of us currently have, I think, on social care, because until we fix that, we're going to have people stuck in hospitals. We're going to have carers who get no respite. We're going to have people who are being neglected in their own homes or elsewhere. So we need to I think to have a relentless focus on social care, but also the needs of the people who we don't hear enough from, different ethnic minorities, small interest groups, and so on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. That's a very interesting point about the wider determinants in social care.
Yeah.
Yeah, well received on that. And yes, and finally, what does patient first mean to you?
I think that's quite simple. I think everything I do in this world, this job, and everything other people in the system ought to do should start with a question, which is, what difference will this make to the lives of patients and their families? And that's true of whether you are a frontline Healthwatch worker or whether you are working in the finance office of an NHS trust. Everything you do is being done for one reason and one reason only, which is to make the lives of people better. And if it's not, if we don't know how that's happening, then we need to ask the question, why? That's what I mean by patient first.
Thank you very much for that. It's very helpful. Would you like to add anything else before we come to a close?
No, I think only to pass on my, if you could please pass on my thanks to everyone, Healthwatch Staffordshire, who do pretty good work, very good work. And also, I think we must never forget, you know, what the staff of the NHS and social care have to do. And personally, I always remain full of admiration for what they do and very grateful. And I think part of what we do should be in putting the patient first, which is what they want to do, is to help them do their job properly by making their lives better. If we can do that, that would be great too.
Appreciate that. And again, thank you for that. And I just want to say that we have got a really good team here at Healthwatch.
Yeah.
They work really hard. So it's well received from you as well. So thank you for that.
Good. Okay.
Brilliant.
Very nice to talk to you, Baz.
Stop the recording.